Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. Joining me in the studio tonight on the last day of March, first of all, we have Cary, who is now famous for reclaiming these streets. Edinburgh, Cat, I understand.
I don't know about famous, but I'm one of the co-organizers.
Well, welcome back to the programme anyway, Kat. It's nice to see you again. And sitting on my left, or your right, as we look at it, is, of course, the celebrity chef who's endorsed by Hardeep Singh Kohli, and that is, of course, our own Chris McCusker.
Good evening, Gordon.
Welcome back, Chris. We will come to both of you in a moment, but first of all, as usual, we will be doing a coronavirus update. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. Beg your pardon, I'm just trying to unfreeze my script. There we go. Now, tonight's coronavirus update, and as of 2 o'clock tonight, a total of 1,821,122 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,602,690 have been confirmed negative, 218,432 have tested positive. There are 542 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. Of course, not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and so not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 6 new reported deaths of people who tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who've now died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,602. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 237 were in hospital last night, 21 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 2,463,069 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 354,756 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 126,713 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 43 since yesterday. This number only refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. And now to National Records of Scotland COVID update. As at the 28th of March, 9,958 deaths have been registered in Scotland where the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by the National Records of Scotland today. In the week between the 22nd and the 28th of March, 61 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, a decrease of 5 deaths from the previous week. The majority of deaths occurred in hospitals, representing 43 deaths, with 13 deaths at home or in non-institutional settings, and 5 deaths in care homes. Around half of the deaths were people aged 75 or over, representing 32 deaths, with 13 of those aged under 65. Deaths from all causes are below average for this time of year for the third week in succession. There were 33 fewer deaths when compared with the 5-year average. Now, to our main item of news tonight, and just before we come to that, we'll be showing a little video of the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Now, the election, and the SNP is to announce a virtual national tour. Nicola Sturgeon today launched the SNP's election campaign by announcing a national virtual tour and a series of digital town hall meetings to take the SNP's message of hope and optimism across the country. Launching a new poster in Glasgow, the SNP leader drew attention to a series of progressive SNP policies already announced, including the biggest NHS pay rise in the history of devolution, a digital device for every school pupil, and a doubling of the Scottish Child Payment.
In normal times, I would be crisscrossing the country, meeting just as many people as possible on the election campaign trail. But COVID means that is not currently possible. And so over the coming weeks, I'll be touring Scotland virtually to meet people online. We'll be holding a series of digital town hall meetings from Stranraer to Shetland. Right now, I'm here to mark the official start of the SNP campaign with the launch of our new poster. Later today, we will be introducing our fabulous team of constituency candidates, and they are joined by our most diverse list of regional candidates ever, with someone with a disability or someone from one of our BAME communities at the top of each list. These are, of course, not normal times, but they are the most serious of times. And that calls for experienced leadership and serious government. That is what people across Scotland expect and deserve. And that is what I will deliver as your First Minister if you re-elect me. Over the past year, I have dedicated the SNP government to one overriding task: tackling the pandemic to keep Scotland safe. And I have done my level best every day to steer us through. That will continue to be my #1 priority. Of course, thanks to the incredible efforts and sacrifices of everyone in Scotland and the magnificent success of the vaccine rollout, we're now hopeful that better times do lie ahead. And so there is also a big focus from the SNP on policies to drive recovery. And we are posing this question for the future too. Who should decide the kind of country we will be after the pandemic? Should it be the people of Scotland or politicians like Boris Johnson? I believe Scotland's future should be Scotland's choice. So in this election, the SNP's offer is this: first and foremost, strong leadership and serious government to lead Scotland through the pandemic. COVID is not yet over. We need an experienced hand at the wheel. Second, a transformational policy programme to kickstart and drive our recovery with the NHS, jobs and an economy that works for everyone at its core. The SNP is proposing the most ambitious policy programme any party has ever put before the people of Scotland in a Scottish Parliament election. The biggest NHS pay increase in the history of devolution, to show our appreciation for the heroic work of health workers over this past year. A new national care service, a cancer recovery plan, 100,000 affordable homes supporting 14,000 jobs a year, a laptop, Chromebook or tablet for every school pupil so no child misses out on learning, a doubling of the Scottish Child Payment as part of our mission to end child poverty, a rural enterprise fund and a women's business centre to help the next generation of entrepreneurs. And all of that in just week 1 of this election campaign. Over the coming weeks, the SNP will continue to set out our policy platform. These measures will offer practical help, but they also tell a story of the kind of Scotland we can be, a country of compassion and solidarity, where we look out for one another and offer a helping hand. But of course, there is an obstacle in Scotland's way. Westminster is taking us in the wrong direction. Against the will of the people who live here, they've imposed years of austerity and forced through a job-destroying hard Brexit. That is why, when the crisis is over, after COVID, we will give you the right to decide whether to become an independent country and take our future into our own hands. Independence would equip the Scottish Government and people with the powers we need for a long-term recovery made here in Scotland. It will mean Scotland's future will be in Scotland's hands. So at this vital election, vote SNP for experienced, committed leadership to guide Scotland through this pandemic. Vote SNP for a government of bold, progressive policies to kickstart and drive recovery and build a fairer society. Vote SNP for the right to decide your future. On May 6th, to build a better Scotland, make it both votes SNP.
Well, we heard from Nicola Sturgeon there. A very optimistic and upbeat appeal for votes there, Chris, from the First Minister. Is there anything, do you think, from what Nicola Sturgeon was saying there today, that stands out for you from all of the things that have been announced today? Because it's been a day of massive announcements from the SNP, hasn't it?
Well, apart from the policy announcements, what stands out for me is obviously both votes SNP. And that should be a clear choice to deliver a majority in Holyrood. And a lot's been said about, the recent machinations with regarding various parties and various parties morphing into another party and whatnot, and what have you. But at the end of the day, people shouldn't lose sight of the one goal, which is independence, of course. And no matter how you cut it, Westminster is never going to be, the answer for Scotland moving forward. So from that point, it's hardly surprising that you get a strong statement from Nicola, reinforcing the SNP2 votes.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Kat, a lot was being said by Nicola Sturgeon there about the inclusion in terms of the types and number of people who they're putting forward as candidates. The idea of putting black ethnic minority, Asian ethnic minority candidates up in the list is a relatively new one, but also they're putting forward a lot more women in the constituencies as well. Would you welcome these changes to the way the candidates are being selected?
I do welcome these changes, and unfortunately, these aren't new. They're new to Scotland, but they're not new in democracy. And especially, I think we don't talk enough about how the proportional representation system is maybe not perfect, but it is one of the best democratic arrangements we have, because it is more reactive, and we do have these tools that we can use so that underrepresented groups can be represented in our parliament, because sometimes we don't realize what we need for equality. Maybe that's not the most popular thing. That's why we have a party that can make these judgments and explain it to us. And I think they've done a really good job of expressing why it's important, especially with the voting franchise expanded as it is this time.
Of course, the voting franchise has been extended to 16-year-olds, hasn't it? Which I think was the same, or is the same, as we would expect to have in council elections. Do you think that there's been enough attention paid to that particular demographic? Because they are, to my mind at least, very much an invisible demographic, the teenage vote, because they're new to politics and they're still learning about it. Are we reaching out enough to them, do you think?
I actually just spoke with Emma Roddick yesterday about this, because I'm no longer in the category of youth voters.
We don't believe it.
I do have concerns about the pandemic, because I think that it's really healthy for these 16-year-olds to be enfranchised. But I do think that it's in high school and in school that they learn civic responsibility, react with the counselors, and really learn how to engage in a way that's, you learn from your family and your parents, but you also learn from your school, because where one might drop the ball, the other might pick it up, and you need to form your political reality with various opinions to kind of figure out what you want. But I think that it is something that we need to push for, is to engage and find, how to reach the new voters, because I think that a lot of them take it very seriously and really do appreciate it. And this shapes the next generation of politicians and activists going forward, and citizens.
Well, let's hope so. And Chris, just before we leave the subject of young voters, I'm often thinking that a lot of what young voters find out about politics, particularly those teenagers, comes directly from their parents, doesn't it? So there is a parental responsibility to try and pass on to our children the ability to look at a wide range of topics and to come to a considered decision based on facts and not on straplines.
Well, yeah, you're quite right, Gordon, and it's been well documented on this channel that both my sons are very much engaged in politics. My younger son, Scott, was at Aberdeen Uni studying politics and is now doing a postgrad at Strathclyde. My other son, Kieran, in Dundee, again, he's not wholly on the side of SNP, but he's not wholly on the side of the Green Party either. But he's on the side of independence. So, but yeah, I got my political involvement through my father. I remember my father spitting feathers at the television when Thatcher came on and stuff like that. That got me asking questions of my modern studies teacher, which, back in the day, I get slapped down for asking intellectual questions. They probably thought that I was on drink or something like that at the time, because children weren't allowed to sort of like engage. I struggled in my formative time in trade unions, trying to engage young adults into the trade unions because they didn't see the sense of it. They thought it was an outdated system, and they didn't understand the concept that once you join a trade union, then you take that membership to your next job, and then your next job, and then your next job. So, but I mean, to be honest with you, and again, if I could just elaborate on this for a second, because I think it's quite...
Chris, we haven't got time, unfortunately, to elaborate on it this evening. Unfortunately, Chris, I'm sorry, we have to leave the subject there for the moment and move on, I'm afraid. And we're back to the election, and this time a record number of disabled and black and Asian and ethnic minority candidates standing for the SNP. Following a close of nominations for candidates to the Scottish Parliament, SNP campaign director Keith Brown has emphasised the importance of casting both votes for the SNP at the upcoming election to ensure that a Parliament which is more representative of the people of Scotland. A record number of disabled and BAME candidates are standing for SNP in May's election after SNP members voted to take positive action to support diversity and to ensure a broad range of voices at Holyrood, reflecting modern Scotland. 1 in 5 SNP candidates are disabled. 11 candidates are BAME, with 4 at the top of the SNP regional list. And constituency candidates are gender balanced. Now, Kat, let me come to you first of all on this. We mentioned earlier on the issue of gender balance, which is obviously addressed in this particular story. But why is it so important to the SNP, do you think, to engage so much with the ethnic minority population and women in particular?
Well, something that I've been very pleased to see with the selection process with the SNP is that oftentimes when you have reserved slots or zipped lists, they're sometimes called, if you do gender balance and then you do underrepresented candidates separately, a lot of times women from those underrepresented groups are the ones who fall at a disadvantage. So I was really pleased when I saw the regional list came out to see how many women who are disabled or women from minority ethnic groups were at the top of the list. And I have to say that Scotland is open, inclusive, and outlooking because we do these things, because we take these measures. Because you never, if you're part of the advantage group, you don't really realize, unless you sit and think about it, it's easy to ignore that others are disadvantaged. So I think to make sure that all groups are represented in Parliament is the only way that we're going to be fair and democratic and treat every person who lives in Scotland like they are sovereign.
Well, that's a good point to fix on. Chris, the idea of equality and a diversity of representation is obviously something which the SNP feels is vital for the future of a new Scotland, particularly a Scotland which might become independent.
Well, of course, I think that a party, or should I say a government, should be reflective of the people who elect that government. My friend and comrade Graham Campbell's been on the show more times than I care to mention.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see the first African Caribbean elected to the Parliament and bring the wealth of talent that Graham has, and the amount of knowledge. Again, there's also Rosa Sally. Again, she was, a Glasgow girl, a former refugee, an asylum seeker, and that's what Scotland is all about. We welcome, obviously, refugees and asylum seekers, and we wish to be reflective of the people that come to Scotland in order to set roots down and, hopefully go on through life. So, I mean, from that point of view, it's ideal. But it's not just, it's actually worth pointing out that, and Kat made this point, which is really great, is the fact that it's not just, something that the SNP have dreamed up over Christmas.
No.
The SNP have been working towards this, through the duration of the last Parliament.
Yes.
So I mean, again, if you look at the demographics of the Scottish Tories, they've only got one disabled member in there, Jeremy Balfour, and they've got no Asians, they've got no blacks, they've got no Chinese or whatever. But then you look across the floor and you've got Anna Sawa, front and centre for the Labour Party, which is great. I've got a lot of time for Anna, so I just wish they had a lot of time for Scotland. Again, you look at the Lib Dems, and there's absolutely nothing going on there. I mean, I don't even think they've got a woman elected. And thankfully it's a wee bit more diverse, in the Green Party, but again, no DAME. But I understand that they are standing BME candidates.
Okay, well, listen, Chris, I'm sorry, we'll have to stop you there and move on. As I say, we've got a very packed programme this evening. And still on the subject of the election, the Scottish Greens have pledged a new deal for renters. The Scottish Greens have pledged rent controls as part of a new deal for renters to enshrine people's right to a home. The call comes after a pandemic exposed how private renting is often expensive and insecure. The Scottish Greens pledged to make a winter evictions ban a permanent feature after the pandemic, as they are in countries like France, to strengthen the landlord registration process and establish a private rented sector regulator to oversee the sector, to investigate tenants' complaints and to recommend future reforms. The Scottish Greens will introduce a cross-cutting goal of ensuring that housing costs represent no more than 25% of a household's income, including a points-based system of rent controls. And now, Kat, we have spoken on this programme before about the whole issue of the rented sector in Scotland and how insecure renting can be. Do you think the Greens are onto something with this policy? Because there must be thousands, tens of thousands of Scottish voters living in rented accommodation who are always worried about rises in their rents or being evicted.
Yeah, I am one of those people, and I know how hard it is to find the right place. I mean, the right place, an adequate place. And I know how difficult it is when your landlord sells, and they, of course, have a right to do that. When you have a private landlord, I mean, this is my third flat living in Edinburgh, and I finally have a private landlord, and I have an excellent, excellent landlord. But she also spends a lot of time trying to study the regulations. It's almost like a part-time job for her. So I think that there might be quite a few landlords that welcome this as well. If there's regulations that are making it easier for all of us. And I mean, 25% of my income, if my rent was only 25% of my income, I would be very, very happy now. And
so you're a big fan of this then, Kat?
I mean, I haven't looked specifically at the plan, and of course, everything has hidden drawbacks. So I'm in favor of making it easier for people to rent, because I mean, I'm an elder millennial, but we don't own property. Unless you're very well off, it's not a normal thing to be able to own property, because it's just for people who have more money. So I think having rights for renters is really, really important. We need to throttle back on the Airbnb.
Okay, thank you for that, Kat. Chris, you and I are old enough to remember the days of council housing And of course, we're also old enough to remember the days when Margaret Thatcher ensured that much of it was sold off. Do you think that there, as well as the private rented sector, there is a bigger role also for the public sector in rented accommodation?
Well, of course, and it's ideal that you choose to speak to me on this subject because I was actually homeless and private renting for about a year and a half. Before I got my current house, which is social housing. And I wouldn't have got that unless the Scottish Government had actually made the policy of the fact that I think 13% of every new build has to be apportioned to social rent. So I mean, I benefit greatly from that.
Yeah.
And, back in the day, as you quite rightly pointed out, it was I think it was the mid-80s, early 80s to mid-80s, and it was very much a capitalist society where you had politicians telling people to get on their bike in order to go to work, and
because Thatcher was a huge proponent of property ownership, wasn't she? That was her vision for Britain. A country full of homeowners was her vision. But of course, that's left us with very little social housing as a result.
Yeah. I mean, and an awful lot of the council tenants were actually duped into buying their homes because it was so cheap and so affordable. My own father was complicit in this. He bought his own council house, and then suddenly his family turned around and called him a snob.
Oh dear.
There are societal impacts on entering into a capitalist market. But what the Scottish Government have said is the fact that they are committed to social rent and also building social homes.
Yeah.
But I think they could go a lot further and work progressively with the Greens in order to advance land reform, and especially, as Kat points out, the whole caper surrounding Airbnbs, especially in the city centre.
Okay, Chris. Listen, I'm sorry to cut you off there. We're still moving along and still with the election. This time, the Labour leader Anna Sarwar says that Alex Salmond's standing for Holyrood is part of a revenge mission against Nicola Sturgeon. The Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar has accused Alex Salmond of standing for Holyrood as part of a revenge mission against Nicola Sturgeon. Mr. Sarwar also stepped up criticism of Douglas Ross, saying that he fronts a game-playing, inward-looking, childish opposition. The Labour leader is hoping to capture second place from the Tories by putting the National Recovery Plan at the centre of his campaign. Mr Sarwar is contesting the Glasgow Southside constituency against the First Minister and was judged to have performed well in the BBC Leaders' debate last night. Now, Kat, I don't know about you. I watched a little bit of the debate last night, and I did happen to hear some of Mr Sarwar's comments, and he did actually come across quite well, didn't he? It's one of the first occasions I can think of where I actually sat and listened to the man for a while.
I have not watched the whole thing because I had a branch meeting last night, but I did watch a good portion of it, and I had to say that initially when I saw people saying that Sarwar did so well, I kind of was like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I'll watch it for myself, but I really did. I mean, I don't have much exposure to him at all, and I did like what he was saying. I just wish he was more open to independence and just democratic self-determination.
I think a lot of people feel the same way, particularly 40% of Labour voters, Kat.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, what was your reaction to Anna Sarwar's performance last night? Did you watch him?
I did actually, and as I say, I was quite impressed with him. But again, the fact that Annas is wedded to Westminster, then that's my initial turn off right away. But the great distinction between Annas and the First Minister, Annas is supposed to be a Labour core socialist, and yet the First Minister talks about solidarity more than Annas does. But he landed one on Douglas Ross's chin and made him look like a petulant schoolboy. So, I'll give him kudos for that. As opposed, Willie Rennie was just his normal Willie Rennie. But I was really, really impressed with Lorna Green.
Yes, I heard many good things about Lorna's performance. Yeah.
Yeah. No, honestly, I was. I was actually quite impressed with Lorna.
I think it's Lorna Fraser.
Slater.
I beg your pardon, who represents the Greens.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, no, honestly, absolutely brilliant. No, Lorna Green is actually, I've just remembered, that's her Twitter handle.
I think we're remembering Lorne Green from Bonanza, Chris.
Oh, now behave yourself. You're getting into the realms of Host and all the rest of it, Manolito.
Well, listen, before we go much further, we need to still think about the policies and the politics of last night. And the First Minister came out looking pretty good. But you mentioned the Greens. The Greens are polling pretty well at the moment, Chris, aren't they? And if things go according to plan and nothing else gets in the way, they look like they might actually increase their seat number this year.
I would relish the Greens to gain as many seats as they possibly can, because there's a lot of work, as I said earlier on, that the SNP and the Greens can do in coalition, and we can do an awful lot for the country with regards to land reform, with regards rents, with regards greener travel and stuff like that, and also the just transition into renewable energy, which is the way to go. The polar opposite, of course, is you've got Douglas Ross, gagging to dive into the oil and gas sector. When it was only back in 2014, they told us that the oil and gas sector was absolutely doomed.
Yeah, the oil was running out, wasn't it, in 2014?
Yeah, and there was nothing there left to forage. So, he's on a hiding to nothing with that chat. But as I say, going forward, Nicola again, was on mark as usual. And ready to rebuke them. The only problem about the actual programme itself is the fact that the audience members were 2/3 unionists and one not even 1/3 independent.
I guess we come to expect that from the BBC, Chris. Listen, unfortunately, we need to move on. And of course, we can't get through the programme without mentioning the Alba Party, who have announced their party's candidates for the upcoming election. Now, it would take too long to go through the whole list, but I just wanted to reel off a few names who I recognise. Certainly, one of the first that appears actually for South Scotland was Cary Wilson, who's well known to this programme. Also for Lothian, we've got Kenny McCusker and Alex Arthur. In North East Scotland, of course, there's Mr Salmond himself, Councillor Brian Topping and Dot Jessamine also in that area. In the west of Scotland, Chris McElhinney, another SNP councillor who's quite well known to many of us. And of course, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh as well in central Scotland, Alex Salmond's assistant, I think you might say. Also Dr Jim Walker, and in mid-Scotland and Fife, Neil Hanvey MP, who recently moved to the party, and in the Highlands and Islands, Judith Reid, also announced today. Now, Kat, let me come to you first. The Alba Party, it's so new that people haven't really had a chance to get their heads around this yet and what effect it might have in the election of list regional MSPs. But having just made it at the last minute, I mean, literally today was the deadline for candidates. Do you think there's anyone that I've read out so far that stands out for you?
No.
No?
I mean, they stand out for me, but not in a way that I want to elect them. This seems to be a group that has been fairly toxic on social media by calling anybody who is active in the SNP or other groups as being careerists or opportunists. And I can't help but think that this smacks of careerism and opportunism. And I really think that gaming the proportional representation system is not something that is healthy for democracy. It's not healthy for devolution. It's not healthy for independence. It's not healthy for any of us. And I will not be supporting the Alba Party in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I think that's pretty emphatic. But gaming the system by creating a new party isn't really gaming it, is it? Because the unionist parties have three parties on the list to the SNP's one with the Greens. So, there's maybe room for one more.
I'd rather the people speaking nonsense and making fools of themselves at First Minister's questions to be from unionist parties, personally.
Okay, fair enough. You can't say fairer than that. Chris, what was your reaction when you heard the list of names coming out today? Have you had a chance to peruse the potential Alba candidates yet?
I've perused them, and some of the candidates I'm a bit saddened about. Other ones, it is what it is. I'm not going to get drawn into a slagging match and stuff like that.
No, we don't want to do that tonight anyway, Chris.
No. But what I want to do, actually, seeing as how we're discussing the subject, is the fact that I want to actually call for unity and solidarity for Scotland, not for the SNP, not for Alba, but for Scotland. We need to get this done, and if they've got their objective, that's fine. What have you? Away and play with your wee objective. We've got our objective, and our objective is clear. It's both votes SNP. Now, on the hunt system itself, as I have studied it, and it can only work for one party and one party only. And if Nicola wants to kick me out the door, but if that other party happens to be the Greens, then I would put my shoulders behind the Greens.
Okay, Chris. Well, you've made that very clear. Listen, I'd like to move on now, and we're now going to talk about Brexit and, of course, the growing threat that it poses to workers' rights. The Trades Union Council today had warned that the UK is at real risk of falling behind the EU on workers' rights. The Trades Union Congress has highlighted that the EU has a number of initiatives planned to benefit workers. However, the UK has no similar legislation on the way. It added that measures passed before the UK left the EU had still not been implemented by the Tory government, including overpaid paternity leave and flexible work, and compensation for workers for cancelled shifts and predictability of hours for 0 hours contracts. 3 months on from the UK-EU trade deal, the Trade Union Congress challenged the UK government to keep the pace with the EU workers' rights. The warning comes only a matter of months after the Business Secretary confirmed that the Tory government intends to review protections and potentially water down standards. During a committee evidence session on the issue, Kwasi Kwarteng said, "We want to look at the whole range of issues relating to our EU membership and examine what we wanted to keep." Now, Kat, when I hear a Tory politician saying they're examining what's in something and they're deciding what they want to keep, they're basically implying that they want to throw a whole lot of stuff out, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that it will make the Tories money, and it will keep their objectives of keeping the union together the more they allow the standards for workers' rights to fall by the wayside. This is kind of British establishment 101.
So do you think this is part of an ongoing long-term Tory plan to make sure that the workers in the United Kingdom end up as part of some kind of sweatshop economy?
I think that they never would have gotten out of the sweatshop business if it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, I think it is very British establishment to want to build wealth for the state at the cost of the people. That's where I think Scotland's values are inherently different than British values. And I do think that this is maybe not an ongoing. I just think it's kind of all there in, like, I learned about it in American revolutionary history growing up, that this is what the British stand for.
And nothing much has changed. Chris, do you think this is just more of the usual Tory sort of ideology of keep the poor poor and keep them keen?
Well, of course it is. Do you know what I mean? The whole raison d'etre of the Conservative Party is capitalism, and capitalism exists to stamp out any uprising of the proletariat. There's
a word I haven't heard from a long time, Chris. Proletariat.
As we did, in the mines and the steelworks and all the rest of it, the car factories, it was only then that, the capitalist fat cats actually rolled back and
Yeah.
realised the fact that the backbone of the country is actually the workers,
Yeah.
and we've seen that borne out through this pandemic, as the fact that the people who are, dare I use the word, applying themselves in menial labour. That menial labour has never been more valued today than it has ever been in our history. We've taken for granted people who sweep the streets and people that flip burgers and stuff like that and all the rest of it. My God, there was a study out the other day there that I can't remember what I think Denmark uses the euro, and they pay a McDonald's workers a starting wage of €22 an hour.
Wow. I think I'll move to Denmark.
Do you know? So I mean, you know, when you've got that, and it's the unfortunate thing is though is the fact that capitalism and socialism have to equally coexist.
Yeah. Maintain a balance.
And it is a yin yang.
Yep.
You know, and if England chooses capitalism, fair play, all the best. Scotland chooses, you know, to be a wee bit, maybe not socialist the way I would want it, but definitely left of centre, that's for sure. And that's the direction that the SNP are going in.
Well, we'll see, I guess, how that pans out in the election, Chris, but certainly that draws a line under that subject very nicely. Now, we're moving on to the Downing Street Race Review, which says that there is no institutional racism in the United Kingdom. A landmark report on racial disparity has criticised the use of the term institutional racism and says that other factors such as family influence, socioeconomic background and religion have a more significant impact on life chances than the existence of racism. The report by the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities has been described by race equality campaigners as deeply cynical. The review behind the report was set up by Downing Street to investigate racial disparities in the United Kingdom in response to the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, and it marks a significant shift in government policy, stating its findings present a new race agenda for the country. The Commission's report notes that while racism and racial injustice do still exist, we no longer see Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. The Commission has been widely criticised by campaigners and unions, with some accusing the review of denying the experiences of black and minority ethnic people. The TUC General Secretary, Francis O'Grady, said the Commission had chosen to deny the experiences of black and minority ethnic workers, adding that institutional racism trapped people in poverty, insecurity and low pay. Sundar Katwala, the director of British Future, said that black and Asian Britons in our society today face less prejudice than their parents or grandparents. They may well fare better than those in many other countries. But such comparisons make little difference to the lives of ethnic minority Britons in 2021. Now, let me come to you first, Kat, for your reaction to this. Now, this report has been widely criticised as being dramatically watered down. I think racial campaigners are deeply disappointed at the tone of this. It's basically trying to reframe the entire racial issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if they say that this is because of socioeconomic status and wage disparity, then where are all the policies that help fix those problems, right? If they wanted, I mean, they said it's not deliberately rigged. Well, what if it's not deliberately rigged? What if it's just rigged? You know, I honestly, we have to have reserved list spaces and stuff like that because there is racism that's just, we all have our own internal biases. And I just think that it's ridiculous and insulting that this says that this report came out like this.
Do you think you could call this kind of racism a sort of latent racism that sort of lies on the back of people's consciousness, and it's not something that they're deliberately doing? But, you know, as you say, we are in the sort of white or non-ethnic minority community take our sort of privileges for granted, don't we?
Oh, yeah, and I grew up somewhere in America where it is overwhelmingly white as well, just like it is here in Scotland. And I didn't really meet a whole lot of people that weren't white until I joined the military. And then I did. I mean, I they people are not treated the same. I wasn't treated the same as a woman, and I wasn't treated the same as a black man or a black woman. There are all different things, and it's never easy to separate these things that are inside of us. But I've heard it described as a caste system, kind of like everybody's in a different level a little bit,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's just different. But I think ignoring this and saying it doesn't exist is the worst possible thing we can do. I'm not one for being like, you're racist or this is right, calling people names. I think it's really important to recognize the actions in ourselves, in our neighbors, and I think it's important to have these conversations and to say, hey, this is something that's problematic. Maybe we could think of a different way of going about this because you're hurting someone. Because what's the first thing you do when somebody calls you racist? No, I'm not. I can't
Yeah.
be. So, there is a thing where we can reframe how we're dealing with these things, so that people don't get so offended. And just legitimately, we all get defensive when we're insulted, right? So I think we just need to look inside ourselves and the people that we love that will listen and talk about these things to try and be fair to everyone.
Okay, thanks for that, Kat. Chris, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with an Indian gentleman many years ago when he was explaining to me the kind of latent racism that existed in India when he lived there. And he was telling me that Indians in general hated Pakistanis and Pakistanis hated Indians. And I'm thinking, here we are in the United Kingdom with a similar kind of latent racism where we automatically make assumptions about people based basically on how they look or where they come from.
Well, you're opening a can of worms when you're talking about the partition between
Yeah.
India and Pakistan.
Well, I don't want to get bogged down in that. I'm using it as
No,
an
no, no,
example.
no, no. But again, I was actually going to square that circle and bring it back to the British Empire, and it is that class society that was created back in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. Where you would not get anyone of ethnic colour, in the middle classes, let alone the upper class. Back then there was no sort of like race question. They were just referred to as working class. And possibly some of them were actually lower than working class. And that's the way that the Victorian system set
Because
the
they
class
exploited
society out.
that similarity in India, didn't they?
Yeah,
With the caste system.
Of course they did, and they done it fantastically and stuff like that. And you can obviously see, what happened as a result. But I mean, again, it happened in Italy as well. When there was people following Mussolini in the black shirts and stuff like that. It's endemic. But what actually gets me is the fact that they're now saying that it's not institutionalized, so therefore they can stand away from it and say it's somebody else's problem. That's what they've done here.
Okay, Chris, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but we're pressed for time this evening. Now to the Russians and the jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is starting a hunger strike over a lack of medical care. The jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny declared a hunger strike on Wednesday in an attempt to force the prison holding him outside Moscow to provide him with proper medical care for what he said was acute pain in his back and both legs. The fate of Navalny, one of President Vladimir Putin's most prominent critics, is in focus after he said last week that being woken up by a guard every hour during the night amounted to torture, and that his appeals for treatment for acute back and leg pain had been ignored. In a handwritten letter addressed to the governor of his prison, which was posted to social media by his team on Wednesday, Navalny said his daily request for a doctor of his choice to examine him and proper medicine for his problems to be provided had been ignored. Kat, I guess this is not surprising, is it? Navalny, poor man, he's been through so much, but to then put himself through a hunger strike because he's so desperate for medical help is even more tragic, isn't it?
It is, and I can't help but think of all the other people who don't have the tools. I think that Alexei Navalny is doing this in part, or I hope he's doing it in part, for the other people who are prisoners who don't have the platform he has. Because if they're treating him like this, they're treating all their prisoners like that. And my heart goes out to all the people in Russia.
Fair enough. Okay, Chris, what's your reaction to Navalny's announcement of a hunger strike? I guess it wouldn't surprise you. It certainly didn't really surprise me, although it is a bit shocking, isn't it?
Well, we tend to think that, since the cessation of the Cold War, that these practices don't happen anymore. But in actual fact, lo and behold, they do. And probably the Russian state didn't think that the letter could get sneaked out to his supporters and then put on social media and stuff like that, so that the rest of the international world can see exactly what's happening. And I mean, Kat's right. Let's hope that he's doing it for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And not just doing it, because he has got a platform in order to, sort of like make himself relevant.
Okay. Now, I understand we're actually going to our last story this evening. Not quite. Oh, I beg your pardon. No, I'm mishearing. Okay. Now, neo-Nazi group has been identified as a concern in a report on violent United States extremists. The neo-Nazi group called The Base was identified as a domestic extremism concern in a non-published version of a recent report by the US spy agencies, but not mentioned in the public version of the same report. Three sources familiar with both versions have said. The non-public version of the report also reported that Americans had travelled to the Ukraine to fight with pro-Russian forces against the country's elected central government, two of the sources said. The public version of the report, principally compiled by the National Counter-Terrorism Centre, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security, was released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence earlier this month. In the March 17th report, the US spy agencies warned that an ongoing threat that racially motivated violent extremists, such as white supremacists, will carry out mass casualty attacks on civilians, while militia groups target police and government personnel and buildings. Members of the base, whose American leader now reportedly lives in Russia, portray themselves as vigilante soldiers defending the European race from a broken system infected by Jewish values, according to the Anti-Defamation League, another monitoring group. This is, Kat, the second time I think that I've heard a report about sort of homegrown extremists in the United States. Do you think that this problem is ever going to go away in the US? It seems to be a pernicious but small groups of these extremists and militias exist in all kinds of places.
I don't think that this is something that we'll ever get rid of completely in our society, right? In a free and fair society where people are allowed to have opinions. I mean, even if it's not free, people might hold them privately. But I think that there's an increase in number, there's an increase in how bad it's been. And these are the things that we're reaping from Trumpism and maybe worse than that, like even back from Reagan, from the neoliberal institutionalism, for people that don't have hope, what are they going to do? They're going to scapegoat someone. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know why people scapegoat Jewish people. It's awful and I hate it. But I do know that all growing up, there's always some militias out in Montana or Wyoming, people that just want to live off the grid. Now, whether they, some are hateful, some aren't. And I think that we need to realize that this is part of our society and education is the way through this.
Okay. Chris, what about you? What's your reaction to this? America seems to have a problem with these groups that won't go away, but it's unusual for a report to be concealed like this. I mean, normally the American system is very transparent, isn't it?
Well, we have seen, as Kat said there, in recent years with the Trump administration, that transparency and Trump just don't go together.
Yeah.
And but I mean, Kat's obviously far more informed than I. I mean, I can only speculate. But I think it's got a link between, and I've often wondered about this, the actual link between fascism and the gun culture in America. And 9 times out of 10, and I don't want to pigeonhole Lindy, but 9 times out of 10 it always seems to be linked with the Deep South. That whole sort of like...
It certainly used to be, Chris, anyway.
Well, was that kind of, some of these outlying states that had their own laws and stuff like that, and it brings back memories of the Dukes of Hazzard and things like that.
Indeed.
And everything's intrinsically linked to the Confederate flag and the KKK and all that kind of thing. I mean, I can only speculate because I view it through TV media and stuff like that. Kat's actually sort of like lived there and witnessed it firsthand. So, she's far more qualified than I.
Okay, Chris, well, thanks for that. Okay, so on to our final story this evening, and that is that the NHS Louisa Jordan Hospital is to close today. After carrying out 32,000 healthcare appointments and training over 6,900 healthcare staff and students and vaccinating about 175,000 people, NHS Louisa Jordan officially closed today. Thanks to the public's continued efforts to reduce the spread of the virus, the NHS Louisa Jordan was not required to treat COVID inpatients. Since July 2020, the hospital has played a crucial role in supporting the remobilisation of NHS Scotland. Today was the last day of outpatient and diagnostic appointments, all training and blood donations. Vaccinations will continue until the 3rd of April at the current site and then move to the Hydro location within the Scottish Events Campus from Tuesday the 6th of April. Once relocated to the SSE Hydro, the NHS Louisa Jordan Vaccination Centre will continue in partnership with other NHS boards to run daily clinics for members of the public to receive their COVID-19 vaccination, with the availability to administer up to 10,000 vaccinations per day. Kat, I suppose the fact that the Louisa Jordan Hospital wasn't required is a vindication of the way the Scottish Government has actually handled the pandemic, but also of, I would say, a sort of pat on the back for the public who have stuck with the rules so well that this hospital wasn't needed.
Yeah, I hope that it's a happy closure, and it's not because, and that everybody's still getting the treatment that they need. But we have to remember that there was a 4% pay increase for NHS staff, and like that coupled with the pandemic, I mean, it's a good mark on the people of Scotland, the Scottish government, Scottish health system, that we're moving in this direction.
Okay, and Chris, finally, a very brief comment from you about the Louisa Jordan before we close this evening.
Yes.
That was a very brief comment, Chris.
No,
Not that brief. Again, it's just as Kat said, it's a testament to the fact that that the Scottish Government have managed to operate under extreme measures, to try and suppress the virus as much as possible. And I think we were pretty close to using it during the summer of last year, when everything started to spike back up. But and what's really interesting to me is the fact that the Tories are actually dismayed that we didn't use it. They're horrified. I'm sure they'll claim that it was a failure because it was never used.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what could we say? Tories do what Tories do.
Well, listen, I'm afraid we have run out of time this evening, but let me just remind everybody who's watching the programme tonight that we're having a major crowdfunder at the moment. So if you'd like to help by becoming a regular supporter at £5 a month, or you'd like to make an individual donation or volunteer, you can do all of those things by following the link at the bottom of your screen now. But from my guests, thank you to Chris McCusker and to Cary for being excellent guests this evening. And from all three of us, a very good night to you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes,
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.